The movie is called Vindicating Trump, and it is by Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, appreciate you coming on with us. Why don't you just make the pitch? Why should people watch this? What will they learn? What surprised you while making this film, if anything?
What is it about Trump that causes some people to become undyingly loyal to him and other people to hate him with such a passion that they will stop at nothing to get rid of him? All the way from character assassination to political assassination to lawfare, which is a kind of legal assassination, to, well, now we have two actual assassination attempts. So what we do in this film, the centerpiece of the film, is a one-on-one with Trump, in which I set myself the task of trying to bring out a certain hidden or private dimension of his personality and character that he himself tries not to show you. He has a kind of a manly aversion to showing you his feelings, his vulnerability, even the way that his inner mind works. And so I try very hard, and I think I succeed in this film in showing you an aspect of Donald Trump that hasn't been widely seen.
Speaking of Dinesh D'Souza, Vindicating Trump is his movie out in theaters now. And Dinesh, to that end, my understanding is Alina Habba and Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, feature pretty prominently to present some of that broader picture of Trump. And one thing that Clay and I, from our interactions with him professionally, and Dinesh, I can tell you, I met Trump in New York the first time. I think I was 13 years old. I knew his kids a little bit growing up in the city, and I've talked to him, many times since then. He is actually a very warm and engaging and charismatic guy, particularly in person.
This is a key point, Buck, because, Trump has certain public qualities and, in fact, is kind of famous, and this puts some people off. He's very egotistical in public. His economy isn't just good. It's like the best economy ever. His crowds aren't simply big. They're like bigger than any crowd ever assembled in human history. So when people listen to that, they think, well, this guy must be totally insufferable, but not really. In private, he's self-deprecating. He pays attention to you. Even though he seems in some senses in public to be a kind of a bully, he never bullies people who are beneath him. You'll never see him bully a waiter or bully a doorman in one of his hotels. He only bullies other 800-pound gorillas, and usually ones that are trying to get him. And then the other thing is that Trump has the supreme virtue of courage. Any other Republican facing 91 criminal charges would have facing 2 criminal charges would have long fled from the field. Trump not only hangs in there, he does his own legal rope-a-dope, he ignores gag orders, somehow he pushes forward. And then look at his spectacular reaction to the 2 assassination attempts. I don't think there's a man alive who would have responded to either assassination attempt in the way that Trump did.
We talked about it, Dinesh, right after it happened, that even in a Hollywood movie, the person playing president of the United States would not have been as much of a badass as Trump was right after that first assassination attempt. And what you said, I think, is so important. Buck and I have been fortunate to get to know Trump behind the scenes. I mean, we've had him on the show a bunch, 7 or 8 times. But we've gotten to do that at Mar-a-Lago. We've gotten to do that at Bedminster. And I'll just give you 2 examples. I bet that will connect with you based on this movie, and I would encourage people to go see it. One, Buck, do you remember when his granddaughter came in at Bedminster and he wanted her to go out? She now is committed to the University of Miami, but he was such a normal, everyday grandpa. It was just so striking to me how excited he was to take her out golfing with him. And you would have never known that he was the president of the United States formerly, or that he was running for president of the United States. His full attention was on her and wanting to know how her golf game was going and wanting to get out and play with her. The other one, and we've talked about it on the show, but for people out there who say, oh my goodness, he's Hitler, Dinesh, you talked about his ability to focus on people and think about them. When we finished the last Mar-a-Lago interview, both of our wives were there and our staff. He insisted that we take milkshakes with us for the drive back to Miami from Mar-a-Lago, because Mar-a-Lago had the best milkshakes on the planet, and he was afraid that we hadn't had anything to eat. The guy is actually really charismatic and very likable one-on-one. And also, I would say, Dinesh, and I bet you saw this with the family as well. The kids all seem to really adore him. The grandkids seem to adore him. It's hard to be an awful person if your kids and your grandkids like you, right?
Absolutely true. And we do bring out one reason to have Laura Trump in the program was to have her talk about this kind of personal side of Trump. You know, with regard to Trump being a Hitler or a dictator, and by the way, that's the kind of poisonous rhetoric that convinces would-be assassins.
Of
Hey, I
course,
can be
yes.
a hero if I take this guy out. But the left really says that about him. And yet, what did he do that was dictatorial in his first term? I mean, he had the opportunity. If he was going to be a dictator, you'd think he would have shown his dictatorial colors. How many prominent Democrats did he indict, prosecute, lock up? None. So there's no dictatorial stuff coming out of Trump. Now, Trump will joke and say things like, well, I won't be a dictator, but maybe on the first day. Now, this guy, this is his shtick. He's a little bit of a stand-up comedian. And for anyone to take that seriously, oh, there we go. He said he's going to be a dictator. He said it himself. I mean, this is called pretending to take Trump in a completely different sense in which he means normal words. And the dictatorial threat is coming from the other side. I mean, if you look at the signature features of totalitarian societies, they have mass surveillance, they have widespread censorship, they have criminalization of political differences, political prisoners, trying to lock up the leader of the opposition party. Well, guess what? It's the Democrats that are doing all of that. So they accuse Trump of being a dictator, but I think what they really mean is that he is the guy that they fear will foil their dictatorial schemes.
Up at clayandbuck.com now, you can watch the trailer for Dinesh's movie, Vindicating Trump. And Dinesh, I do think part of what has pushed some very prominent, very wealthy and influential Silicon Valley folks, I think this was part of Elon's move right as well. There were a few things, but has been the lawfare against Trump, because anybody who understands how totalitarian societies work, anyone who understands how free societies on the other side have to work, I think recognizes that they didn't just discover all these crimes that Trump committed in the 76th year of his life, never having had been charged with any crime for 76 years. It's clearly lawfare. And if lawfare is the future of this country, we actually don't have rule of law.
This is a critical point. I've been reading Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, and he talks about what he calls the Vyshinsky Doctrine, which is this is the one that the Soviets used. Vyshinsky was this guy who basically said, listen, since we aren't present when something happens, a crime happens, we can never be absolutely sure. So we shouldn't try to be absolutely sure. What we basically want to do is basically figure out, we can use some fairly elastic rules, the manipulation of bending of laws, to basically get what we want out of this trial, out of this process. And think about it, that's exactly what the Democrats do. They shop around for a blue jurisdiction. They find a kind of vengeful mob of jurors who kind of want to get Trump in the first place. They find a sympathetic judge, so it becomes a wink-wink operation between the judge and the prosecution. So, to the naive American, they might think, well, there's an actual court. It looks like a court. They're following the outward trappings of law, objections sustained, and therefore it must be a legitimate process. No, it's not a legitimate process, and anyone who's looking closely can see that they're going after Trump for things that they would never go after anyone else. Of course, one interesting question is, why Trump? Like, why only Trump? Why is he the very scary guy? And I think the answer is that he is a very strong guy. This came out in the courage that he displayed with the assassination attempts. Other Republicans are much more weak-kneed than Trump. So the Democrats don't fear Romney. They don't fear Paul Ryan. What they do fear is Trump.
Dinesh, I've said that the most important decision Trump would have to make if he wins is who he picks as attorney general for what you're laying out here. I'm a lawyer. I believe you're a lawyer as well. What has been allowed to occur with our Department of Justice and the targeting of political adversaries has never occurred in the history of any of our lives, and frankly, never really in the history of the United States. How do we get back some measure of trust in our Department of Justice? And do you agree with me that who Trump picks as his attorney general might well be his most consequential pick of all when it comes to stocking his cabinet and his administration.
I agree completely. And my solution to it is somewhat controversial, I will admit. And here's what it is. It is essentially the solution of how do you tame a rogue operation, how do you tame a bully in a schoolyard? And the
Yeah.
answer is you can't do it unless you ambush the bully, unless you respond in kind, unless you show the bully that bullying tactics don't pay off. You might remember when Elon Musk banned some leftist journalists on Twitter, on X, for one single day. If you watch the reaction when that happened, suddenly all these people who were champions of censorship and champions of shutting down disinformation and removing millions of accounts, they became great defenders of free speech. I mean, they were quoting the First Amendment, citing John Stuart Mill. So the moment their free speech was threatened, they rediscovered the value of the principle. So I think that the way to ultimately force the left to stop doing this kind of stuff is to start doing it to them.
It's basically why we have nuclear weapons in multiple countries, right? There has to be a deterrence and a threat factor, or else whoever the most powerful is just keeps doing whatever they want.
Exactly right. And there are many laws, by the way. I'm not talking about unleashing some sort of plague of lawlessness. There are, for example, in the RICO statutes, it says that anyone who is involved in any way in collaborating or participating in an election fraud scheme is committing a serious felony. Now, my point is, all right, so let's take a look at that. Generally, Republican attorneys general take a look at that. They go, well, this hasn't really been used, so we're not going to focus on it. Let it be. The Democrats are pulling out every opportunity from the large accordion book of federal statutes to go after conservatives. But they got to realize the two can play at this game.
No doubt. Dinesh D'Souza, the book is the documentary Vindicating Trump. Encourage all of you to go check it out. 850 theaters nationwide, many different ways to be consuming it. Dinesh, we appreciate the time. Good luck with the film.
If I could say so, guys, vindicatingtrump.com is sort of the one-stop shop to get tickets. You put in your city or your town, and boom, the theaters will pop right up. See it this weekend if you can.
Awesome. Good idea. Vindicatingtrump.com. Check it out. This Sunday, annual Tunnel to Towers 5K run and walk in New York City. Producer Allie and her husband, the wonderful Gerard, do it every single year. The event retraces firefighter Steven Siller's footsteps from the foot of the Battery Tunnel to the Twin Towers, where he raced on 9/11 to try to save lives and in the process sacrificed his own life. Steven's brother, Frank Siller, started the 5K, which pays homage to the 343 FDNY firefighters, law enforcement officers, and thousands of civilians who lost their lives that day. People come from all over the world to participate, including fire departments from as far away as Australia. Proceeds from the event support the foundation's programs, including those benefiting first responders and catastrophically injured service members. If you're in the area and want to participate, not too late to sign up at t2t.org. There are also other events you can do. I'm going to be up in New York City doing a golf outing to help raise money for Frank and everybody at Tunnel to Towers here in a couple of weeks. If you'd like to donate to the incredible work Tunnel to Towers does, you can join both Buck and me in donating $11 a month at t2t.org. That's T, the number 2, T.org.